Hi there, and a very warm welcome from my side. It is a great pleasure to be part of this IDC Portugal Directions once again. I really look forward to hopefully being with all of you in Lisbon next year. Lisbon is definitely one of my favorite cities across the world, and it would be great to be back with all of you as part of this wonderful event. My name is Philip Carter. I'm the Chief Analyst for IDC in Europe, and I also lead IDC's global C-suite research. And in this session, I'm going to give you a perspective on how to prepare for a digital-first world. Last year, we talked about the need for agility, and there was a hope, maybe even an expectation, that we would return to some form of normality. And I think over the last 12 months, it's become clear that's not going to be the case. Organizations will have to make fundamental changes to the business model to prepare for a sustainable world moving forward. So setting up that business model for the future and future-proofing it for that time frame. Now, our view is that that business model will increasingly be digital first, and that's reflected in this quote coming from Miguel Andrade, as I'm sure all of you will know, the CEO of EDP, your largest utility, talking about significant investments going towards creating this digital-first business model from the bottoms up. Now, he's talking about spending €1 billion over the next 5 years, so 200 million euros a year. And just to put those numbers into context, that 200 million per year make up about a quarter of their profits, of EDP's profits. So this is a big bet, and it's increasingly becoming clear to the CEO that it's digital first or die. And it's not just EDP, it's organizations across the world in terms of setting up this digital first business model. You see the likes of Panasonic investing $7 billion in a software company, in Blue Yonder, which is supply chain software, to help drive their connected solutions business. Similarly, the Dutch firm Philips announced the sale of its home appliance business. So they're divesting away from home appliances, but in parallel, acquiring the likes of biotelemetry, capsule software, spending billions of dollars on those acquisitions to build a digital healthcare business. And then finally, Sberbank, which is a really interesting example from Russia. So they're looking to invest $2 billion over the next 9 to 10 years through to 2030 to diversify their business, to move more towards digital, with the expectation that 60% of their revenue will come from non-banking businesses over that time frame. So they're moving into cloud, they're moving into security, they're moving into online delivery, a range of digital first type of capabilities. And what we're seeing is that we have crossed the digital Rubicon. In 2021, the digital economy overtook the traditional physical economy. And in the same way that Julius Caesar, when he crossed the Rubicon in 49 BC, there was no turning back. We're not going to be turning back. And we predict that by 2022, 65% of global GDP will be completely digitalized in the form of new digital products, services, and experiences. And the notion of value will increasingly head towards digital and digital first as a starting point. For business leaders, for all of the challenges that they're facing at the moment, increasingly, the majority of those will and should be answered with digital. And that is the fundamental principle behind this digital first mindset. And it's reflected in our numbers. So if you look at this chart, it highlights the blue line, which is GDP, versus the red line, which is IT spend over a period of time. And as you can see, it's different this time, because Historically, those two lines have stayed quite close together. There was a strong correlation. In 2020, we saw for the first time a much lower correlation as the crisis hit. So we saw the biggest drop in GDP since World War II, yet IT spend held up remarkably well. And we expect it to grow to 7% in 2021. And if you look at digital as part of that, digital spend is growing at about 15 or 16%, 5 times the expected GDP growth. So there you see that separation between the digital economy or the growth in the digital spend and how that is compared to the underlying traditional GDP metrics. But as part of that, we believe that there is a need to redefine resiliency. Resiliency is the name of the game at the moment for business leaders, for the board level, trying to ensure as we head to this next phase of the economic cycle, that we not only prepare for growth, but we ensure that the organization is able to withstand all of the challenges and uncertainty that lie ahead of us. So in the past, pre-pandemic, we defined resiliency in 2 forms. There was the business resiliency, which is trying to restore business operations in the face of a disruption and maintaining a level of operational capability. And then there was IT resiliency, which was separate, where it was about maintaining acceptable service levels when the data center went down or if there was a network issue. It was all about service level agreements and maintaining those service level agreements. Now, in the future, we think it's going to be about digital resiliency, where these worlds need to come together. And so in terms of our definition of digital resiliency, we see 4 key differences in terms of how we define resiliency in the past. First of all, it's about dealing with multiple business disruptions. If you listen to the CEO of Michelin, he highlighted recently how normally they have 1 or 2 operational crises in the supply chain. At the moment, they're dealing with 23. The semiconductor shortages, trade patterns changing, increasing shipping costs, all of these things coming together to form a level of disruptive business environment that is unprecedented. So it's multiple. It's not just one. It's dealing with multiple levels of disruption on an ongoing basis. The second area is digital capability. So these need to be embedded so that you can provide data to drive decision-making, scenario planning, according to all of the different variables that might be hitting an organization based on those disruptions. The third area is around capturing new opportunities, because it's not just about maintaining operations, but it's also about quickly adjusting, taking advantage of those change conditions and capturing new opportunities, using disruptions and crises to go after new markets and leveraging those, because there are opportunities that will arise. And finally, and most importantly, it's about delivering digital outcomes. Organizations have been spending hundreds of millions, if not billions, as we saw, on digital investments. You looked at EDP, you looked at Sberbank, Panasonic, Philips, all of these major investments in digital capabilities. But historically, our research has shown that only 26% of organizations have delivered an outcome on ROI from those investments. So in the future, it has to be about bridging that digital ROI gap and delivering those outcomes. A good example of an organization that is embracing this concept of digital resiliency is Siemens Health. So this is the healthcare unit of Siemens, which operates independently. But as you can see from the statements from the CEO, they've leveraged the crisis to go on the offensive and open up a new chapter for the company's history. They've made a major acquisition over the last few months, but underpinning that is this notion of becoming a digital-first company, and there's no turning back. Similar to the crossing the digital Rubicon, they're not going to be turning back. It's going to be digital-first moving forward. A really good example of a project that they are doing is on the customer support side. So they've connected 200,000 devices in the hospitals that they serve, And they're leveraging the data from that to be able to be proactive with their customer engagements and think not just about mean time to repair for those devices from a break fix response type of mentality to more of a proactive customer experience focus and focusing on NPS and customer advocacy as part of a new way of engaging with those customers based on those technology investments that they've made. But what's really interesting with this example is that they are delivering the outcomes. If you look at their financial metrics over the last 6 to 9 months, the share price has held up remarkably well, and they're delivering on revenue, on profit, all of the expected outcomes associated with those investments, those significant investments that they're going to make. And this is that critical part of digital resiliency. So who's delivering on this? Well, our view is that this is going to be delivered by the Digital Dream Team. This is the new C-suite. It has to be different because digital resiliency is a new definition of resiliency. What is this Digital Dream Team? Well, it's a case where you see operations, customer experience, HR, security and risk, finance, and IT, the technology leadership, all coming together as part of a group of collaborative units. It's not about silos, it's breaking those silos, and the CEO is at the center of this. Now, you might ask the question, what's different with the Digital Dream Team versus the traditional C-suite? So we see 3 key differences, and we'll also talk about what's new in terms of the way that they go about the business. What's different? Every function becomes a technology function. HR, finance, they all need to ramp up their tech IQ, invest in digital capabilities to be able to deliver the outcomes that we talked about so that they can do real-time scenario planning, that they can do workforce planning, that they can engage with the workforce in an experience-driven fashion. These are the capabilities that will define those functions, those business functions. Secondly, really importantly, the technology leadership has a seat at the table. It could be the CIO, it could be the CTO, it could be CDO. It's not so much the role, but technology needs to be there driving the strategy, orchestrating digital, delivering the digital value, which is going to be a new tug of value that we talk about. Not a tug of war across those silos, but a tug of value. And that's where the CEO also comes in, personally engaged, ensuring that this is about collaboration, it's about orchestration across these different business units. What's new? It's about delivering outcomes, as we talked about, this outcomes-driven approach, quicker time to value, and investing in use cases with measures behind, not products and features associated with technology. In 2021, we predict that the growth in tech spend from business leaders will be double that of IT. So the increasingly digital will be business-driven, and it is going to be driven by this Digital Dream Team. But it's not about IT versus the business. It is about these worlds coming together to deliver this new digital value. So what are the priorities for the C-suite, for this Digital Dream Team? So our view is that our research shows that there are 3 key top priorities. Number 1 is productivity. And if you look at this, it's being driven by IT as a starting point, but also into the front office, and increasingly into security. And you're seeing this big focus on automation to drive that productivity, new automation centers of excellence being set up, focusing on workflows, process mining, process automation, a new way of creating these happy paths in these business processes to create touchless transactions for all different business processes, thereby driving activity across the workforce. Part of this is linked to the skills gap, which is emerging. So you need to understand how big that skills gap is, how difficult it is for the C-suite to find the right people to deliver those outcomes. Therefore, automation and productivity becomes critical. Secondly, innovation. Innovation on the supply chain, on the sales side. Interestingly, on HR, on the HR side. So this new focus on innovation to drive growth, to drive disruption, there's a new mentality that's taking seat in the C-suite as they come together in this new fashion. And then putting the customer at the heart of this. So customer engagement is another key priority Interestingly enough, it's not just the front office sales, marketing, and customer care. It's also IT. It's also HR coming to focus on the customer because they realize that that outside-in approach to the way that the business runs is going to be so important to deal with the change in the market and build that digital resiliency that I talked about earlier. Cost reduction, optimization, number 5. Normally, this is number 1 or number 2. It's dropped on the list of priorities, which is really interesting to see. Let's zone into the role of IT in all of this, because we've talked about the C-suite and the digital dream team, but what about the role of IT? Our research shows that 77% of organizations are rethinking the IT organization, restructuring, and 29% of those think it's the most important thing that the organization can do because they're moving from the traditional infrastructure and application world that delivered projects to products and platforms, delivering agility to the business, so an agile mindset to the business, and focusing on these new outcomes. So IT is part of those new engagements, but they need to restructure the teams so that they're able to deliver that iterative time to value to the digital dream team. And at the top of the organization, the CIOs are prioritizing leadership, innovation, strategy, transformation. It's really interesting to see the sort of things that the CIOs realize they need to zone in on in order to not only develop their personal careers, but also ensure that their organizations are going to be able to survive in this new digital economy, where we've crossed the Rubicon and we're looking to deliver this new digital value. Interestingly, cost savings, bottom of the list. Historically, that was top of the list. So we see an evolution in terms of the role of the CIO. The past was focusing on operational cost reduction, risk management. That'll still be there. That's part of the CIO's role. That won't go away. But then building on that, there is this focus on becoming strategic, where most CIOs are at the moment, orchestrating digital, driving agility, creating new products. But the future, the innovative CIO in the future will be leading digital, will be transforming the business and creating these new revenue streams. And they might take on a new role. It might be the CTO, it might be the CDO, but that's the future of the CIO. A good example of this is at H&M. So if you look at H&M, biggest retailer in Scandinavia, and you look at their new organizational structure, top of the group function list is this group, the business tech function, where they've brought together an external executive, Alan Verma from Procter & Gamble, he's based in the US, together with one of their team members who's come up through the ranks, Daniel Pleasant, who knows H&M very well. So you have this outside executive coming in with the internal team, and then they create this new approach to technology, a combination of external experience and internal capabilities to deliver new outcomes. And so this is the new function of technology, business function, focusing on outcomes off the back of that. Now, if you are eagle-eyed and you've been looking at this chart a bit more closely, you will see an interesting box in the group function area, which is around sustainability. And this is another topic which we think is going to be a critical part of the digital-first world. What we see in terms of our discussions with organizations and our research is that increasingly there is a focus on building new frameworks around environmental, social, and governance metrics for organizations to measure and benchmark their sustainability efforts. So you can see here that more than 90% of organizations are considering these frameworks, and a focus on sustainability is a new way of looking at enterprise value for the organization. And a good example of an organization that is looking at this and building out one of these ESG frameworks very proactively is Siemens. You can see with their degree framework, it's not just about the environment. Obviously, decarbonization is a big part of it, but it's about ethics, governance, resource efficiency, equity, employability. These other adjacent areas are as important as the environmental impact piece. As organizations realize that this is a shift towards a stakeholder economy, we as businesses need to realize that we have a responsibility to society, and we need to be able to measure the impact of our business in terms of not just the carbon footprint and environmental impact, but the impact in terms of society, the social impact, the governance metrics that we put in place. And there are a range of new questions that are going to be asked across employees, customers, the regulators, a range of different stakeholders. And so this is a framework that we put in place to help you understand all of these ESG issues and what needs to be done across all of them and which stakeholders need to be taken into account. But this stakeholder economy is real, and you're going to have to, as a C-suite executive, you're going to have to answer the question around what you're doing around data security and privacy, supply chain sourcing. Is it ethical? What's your energy and water management policy going to look like? What are your labor practices? All of these things are cutting across the broader ESG frameworks. And it's not just environment. Environment needs to be part of that, particularly with Climate Week happening at the moment, and the focus from government leaders on climate change. Businesses need to step up to that to the table and ensure that they are also contributing, but use that as a basis, as an anchor point to go much further than just the environmental impact. Because as part of the next phase, there is an opportunity to bring together the digital initiatives and sustainability initiatives to really redefine business value. And this is where the role of technology really steps up into the equation. You look at this survey response in terms of who's driving sustainability or ESG in the respective organizations out there. As you can imagine, CEO, CFO, top of the list, but next comes technology. It's above sustainability or audit or legal. Technology needs to be part of the sustainability strategy, because when you think about the redefinition of business value, and we're moving away from just the financials and the revenue and profit numbers that we saw from Siemens Health, Healthineers, it's also about ecosystem value, how you work in the ecosystem. Are you a good neighbor in your organizational frameworks that you put out there? And then that sustainability value across the environment, social, and governance elements that we just talked about. These layers need to be addressed by every organization out there. And what's becoming clear to the C-suite, the CEO, and the broader organization is that it's only possible with technology. These are complex challenges that need to be solved. We were doing our CIO advisory board roundtable last week, and we were talking about ESG metrics and reporting on those. And there's a lot of work to be done, but there needs data standardization, agreement on what needs to be reported, collection of the data from the various business units. Where do you start in terms of supply chain versus procurement versus HR? But underpinning all of those discussions is clear that the CIO needs to drive this. Technology is part of it. And it won't be possible unless technology is part of the ESG framework. So when we think about the future and where all these organizations are heading towards, whether it be Siemens, whether it be EDP, whether it be Sberbank, all these organizations that I've been talking about, the end point, our view, is the future enterprise, which is our vision for how organizations must organize themselves, structure themselves, invest, and deliver outcomes to participate in this increasingly digital-first world. It is the end point of digital transformation. Last year, we predicted that 75% of all organizations would be completely digitally transformed over the next decade. 75%. What we've realized as part of the accelerated crossing of the digital Rubicon is that that number needs to go up in order for organizations to survive or thrive in the digital economy. So it's going to be higher than 75%. And the time frame is going to be compressed as these innovation cycles start to accelerate. So delivering on the promise of the future enterprise will mean that you need to put digital-first business models in place and make the necessary investments in order to do that. You need to bring resiliency, digital resiliency, into the core so that you can adapt to multiple crises. that you can capture new opportunities and you can deliver those outcomes to bridge that digital ROI gap. You need to ensure that you have not the traditional C-suite, but you break down those silos, break down the hierarchies, create this digital dream team, focusing on orchestrating and collaborating to deliver digital value. With the new brand of technology leadership, CIOs are becoming more strategic, more innovative, CTOs at the table, new functions being set up as we saw with H&M, but there is a new brand of technology leadership that is required. And lastly, and most importantly, in my mind, this notion of delivering sustainable business value. This redefinition of business value is not just about shareholder value, about profits and revenue. It's about ecosystem value and environmental, social, and governance value to deliver on this new business model, which will be reflected in the future enterprise as part of our vision. So with that, I would like to thank you so much for your attention. I look forward to all of the feedback on this notion of preparing for a digital first world. And I really hope that you enjoy the rest of this event. Thank you very much.